Welcome back to the Mel K Show. You know how important I think it is that we understand that what is going on right now in the United States is really about the world. And as I always say, they're not after the United States, they're after the whole world. And right now, the United States seems to be in the way. But I have a great person today who's been working very, very hard. He is from Germany, and his new book out is incredible. And I'm very, very excited to welcome Dr. Michael Nels to the show. Thank you for joining me, sir.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Mel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Your work is incredible. You've been doing, you've had a very long career so far. So I wanted first and foremost to tell my audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll get in to the current book, The Indoctrinated Mind, and what people really need to know, not just about what is happening to us, but what we can actually do about it. So if you could tell my audience a bit about your background.
Well, I studied medicine in Germany, and but immediately became a postdoc in the United States since I was very interested in basic research. So I did postdoctoral research at the University of California in San Diego for 2 years. Then I came back to Germany and did a PhD in molecular genetics with a focus on immunology. So I have a little understanding, I guess, what's going on in the last 4 years since beginning of 2000 with this virus, and also about genetic engineering, of course, because that's what I did for 20 years. I did a lot of basic research discovering the genetic causes of diseases with several Nobel Prize winners, which I was honored to work with. And I actually was also in the pharma business in a way. I had a basic research company in molecular genetics in Munich, where I had a big contract with the pharma industry to find new targets for disease, for medical treatment of diseases. That was very fruitful, but on the other side, I realized that that is not really the best way for eternal youth. That's actually having a lifestyle that is more in accordance with our natural needs. So I finished my career at that point and started to become a writer. And instead of going deeper and deeper to the molecular details of certain genes, I started to try to comprehend what has been discovered so far and create a picture from all the different individual discoveries, like pixels or puzzle pieces to put them together like a jigsaw piece. And the first disease where I found a great understanding, I guess, how it can be prevented is Alzheimer's. So one of my first books was on Alzheimer's disease. I published also a paper on this, which is called Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease, and gave me an insight of how our memory works and what is needed to keep it alive for a lifetime. And that's exactly also the basis of my understanding the immunological part with COVID, but also the understanding of how the brain works, particularly our autobiographical memory, and how it is destroyed due to the measures that we have experienced the last 4 years. And that's also the basis, of course, of my book, The Indoctrinated Brain, because it shows what is done to the brain, how it is transformed, and that this indoctrination is more than just a manipulation of our mind. It's actually a change of our being, of our personality. And that's also what we experienced in the meanwhile. So I think this book is the quintessence of my life, so to speak.
Yeah, and for everyone. It's interesting. When I was reading through your book, I was shocked because I had a while ago done a show on a NATO document about cognitive warfare. It was called Battle for the Brain, a very terrifying document, if you ask me. And I'm looking through it, and then I'm looking at what you were writing, and they're talking a lot, and it sounds kind of like science fiction, but they're talking about using the human mind as a weapon, basically, breaking it down. And this NATO document went out to all the militaries, and this is very high-level cognitive warfare. And they talk a lot about it in this document and in the other work that they put out right for the public about the biometrics and all this stuff having to do with brain science and how they're using like neurology and and they're saying that they're using all these different pathways to, like you said, not change what people think, but change how they think. And I'm thinking this is a military document on manipulating the human brain on a military scale. And that's when I first thought, oh, this makes a lot more sense what we've gone through. So when COVID came and it came around, at what point did you realize that this was kind of a war on our minds more as much as anything else?
Well, the first 2 books I wrote on COVID were actually a strategy to prevent the severe course of the disease, because it was very clear from my immunological background that nobody should die on COVID because the reason people die is what we call a cytokine storm. So it's an overwhelming reaction of the immune system, which is based on a dysregulation of the immune system, mainly due to simple missing micronutrients, foremost vitamin D. And it was clear, very clear from the beginning, and particularly after a few months of research that has been done on COVID patients, that if you give patients, if you increase the vitamin D level in the blood very quickly, nobody dies of the disease. So, but what I realized is that there was a warfare almost against any proposal that vitamin D should be given to the public.
There
And
was.
so I
remember.
realized that it's not about human health, it's about something else. And what I also realized in the first year, when we had all these lockdowns and all these kind of unhuman measurements, they were completely in line with all the measures that I was talking against the years before, when we wanted to inhibit Alzheimer's development. Alzheimer's is a disease which stems from an unnatural lifestyle, and it became extremely unnatural in 2020. So I predicted in the book at the time that we will see an increase in Alzheimer's disease, but also a major increase in depression.
Right.
And as it was in 2019, the World Health Organization told us that we have the highest level of depression worldwide. It's the #1 disease. And a year later, due to the measures, the disease tripled in the incidence rates in America. There's publication on that.
Right.
So I realized the brain itself, and particularly the region which is responsible for developing depression, developing Alzheimer's, our autobiographical memory, is actually the center of the attack. And if I look at what we as humans are, we have to, of course, we want to live, we want to have children, and that is essentially the imperative of evolution. If our predecessors had not followed this imperative, the two of us wouldn't sit here.
Right.
We just not
Exactly.
here.
Right.
And so in order to grow up, we have defense mechanisms. We have the bodily immune system, which doesn't work well if, for example, vitamin D is missing. It needs it for its regulation. But on the other side, we have also a mental immune system, which allows us to not to fight against microorganisms primarily, but against macroorganisms. Mostly human beings. They are the most dangerous enemies we have.
Right.
So in order to react to threats from outside properly, we have to use our memory, our ability to think, our interest in understanding what's going on. That means we have to be curious. And all these these ideas of being curious, being resilient, psychologically resilient, being interested in learning and understanding, and being able to go back to previous experiences and compare what's going on with our previous life, so that we react the best way we can. All these functions, which I summarize as our mental immune system, reside functionally in the so-called hippocampus. That's the center of our autobiographical memory, and also the place where depression takes place or Alzheimer's develops. And so I realized very quickly that 2020 that the hippocampus is under attack. And that we have this increased depression rates, and we have what we experience already. We have a major increase in Alzheimer's diseases. At least in Germany, we see that, and with the numbers, it's in 30% increase in 1 year. So it's dramatic.
Yeah.
And this cannot be explained by age, which is usually said to be the cause, but it isn't, which I show in my paper, Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease. It's actually the lifestyle, and the lifestyle has changed dramatically in 2020. Yes. And then came this what they call the vaccination program, which I call the spiking program. And here it's very interesting. We know from Alzheimer's research that infections, when they are long-lasting, impede the autobiographical memory. They actually harm the autobiographical memory, also a risk factor for Alzheimer's. And already with SARS-CoV-1 in 2002, 2003, papers were published later on, 2006, 2007, that the spike protein of SARS-CoV-1 can initiate something we call neuroinflammation, and leads to a release of certain cytokines, the same ones actually which we see the cytokine storm that leads to the bodily harm. And these cytokines, I give just a few names, like interleukin-1, interleukin-6, or the TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha. These cytokines are inhibitors of the function of the autobiographical memory, the strongest inhibitors you can imagine. So that was already known in 2006, 2007, based on research on SARS-CoV-1. And it was also known that the reason for this damage to the brain based on SARS-CoV-1 is the reason, or the major culprit, is actually the spike protein. So I realized by further research that the spike protein in SARS-CoV-2 has been modified by genetically engineering this furin, cleavage site, which was proposed actually by a think tank to the DARPA in 2018.
Right.
I was wondering for several reasons. First of all, the site was introduced to create a bioweapon, and if you read the text, it's mainly speaks about higher infection rates. But what it doesn't speak about, but is very obvious now, and it became obvious to me very early on, is that after the cleavage by furin, which is like a scissor, we have molecular scissor we have in our body cells.
Mm-hmm.
So if the virus or the spike mRNA is in the cells, and the spike protein is produced and has this furin cleavage site, then the S1 subunit is released. Right. And this S1 subunit can enter the brain via the blood-brain barrier very easily. And it can stay there. And now we have
so many people were saying this. I remember people saying this, probably you included, right in the beginning. I remember Mike Adams, I think you were on his show too, and other people, and they were just shutting it down. And they kept saying that the blood-brain barrier, and it was just, I remember, but you would hear it and then it would be gone. And people kept saying, something is wrong here. And I don't think people were putting it together quite as much as you just said, even right there, that this was an attack on our brains, like on a massive scale. Go ahead.
If you want to conquer the world, if you want to make the people, easy to rule, then you have to shut down their mental immune system. And the mental immune system is basically working in the autobiographical memory. All the functions are there that are required for mental defense. Right. And the key is that the autobiographical memory has a specific function of a specific ability. It can create new cells the whole life. And this creation of new cells is the key for the understanding for the autobiographical memory. And we call this production, which is unique to the brain in this particular area, we call this production the adult, because it still happens in the adult life. Everything else, all other neurogenesis, or the production of new nerve cells in the brain, shuts down when we are grown up. But the hippocampus, the autobiographical memory center, needs to continue in productive neurogenesis in order to be resilient, to be curious, to be able to think. All these abilities are essentially based on this what we call adult hippocampal neurogenesis. So adult hippocampal neurogenesis is shut down when the spike protein is activating the immune cells in the brain and they release interleukin-1 and all the other cytokines, because they are shutting down neurogenesis in the hippocampus, and it has traumatic effects not only on our resilience to our mental immune system. It has, and that's what's really shocking, on which I show in my book. It leads to a vulnerability that to a change in our personality, the traumatic change in our personality.
Yeah, I mean,
I can explain it maybe in a few words, because it's really traumatic, and one has to understand how actually the hippocampus works to understand it, what I'm talking about. So every time we talk, like we talk now, we are able to remember instantaneously and long term what we discussed. I mean, if I think about what I said a few sentences ago, I know it's not my short-term memory; it's my long-term memory already. Short-term memories are only brain circuits in the brain; they don't remember anything. But the long-term memory, that is that we can go back a minute, 2 minutes, half an hour, 10 years back to thoughts we had, and can remember them. And this unique function, a thought just instantaneously remembered for a long time. That's only the only piece or the only part of the brain that's able to do that is the hippocampus.
Wow. And let me ask you real quick, because so you said it before that Alzheimer's paper came. I remember seeing you, and your paper came out, and there was talk about Alzheimer's, and then of course it got shut down immediately. You and I are both very censored, as is anyone that was asking any real questions in the beginning. What you said, that the lifestyle has a lot to do with Alzheimer's. What lifestyle is that is negative, that also kind of was replicated during the measures taken after COVID?
Mm-hmm. So there is, in my book, there is a formula against indoctrination, but essentially it's also a formula against Alzheimer's. So everybody who reads the book will also know what he or she has to do to have a life up to old age without the fear of getting Alzheimer's. Right. And this formula has certain elements, and the central element, of course, is that we have a purpose in life. So that's the central element of our being, that we have to have a purpose in life, because if we don't have a purpose in life, we don't have eustress, that is a healthy stress, we don't have anything to do, and we need this for the new cells in the brain, in the hippocampus, that are daily created, that they have themselves a purpose in life. And if we don't have a sense in life or purpose in life, and we have nothing we experience of which is exciting for us, then these cells have no reason to live, and they actually die. So instead of our hippocampus growing every year by 2, 3, or 4%, it actually shrinks. And so purpose of life is very important. And of course, many people don't have a purpose in life when they grow old because they retire, and the families are not there because you lived alone the whole life. And now, of course, the breakdown of the large families that we have still in the last century, maybe, or the previous century, the 19th century, this is all gone to our modern lifestyle. And of course, the measures have changed this dramatically. Suddenly, we are not allowed to visit our grandparents or parents. Yeah, so we have all this unsocial distancing.
Yep.
And that's another part of my formula. We need other people. Yep. We need to share our thoughts with other people. We have to communicate, because what feeds the hippocampus with new information, which makes the new cells worthwhile living, are usually coming from discussions and talks to other people. And so by shutting down the ability to talk to others, to isolate people, is the worst that can be done to people.
Yeah.
There was actually a publication in the New England Journal of Medicine 2 weeks before the COVID pandemic started. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they showed that even if you live in the Antarctic, as a researcher, after 1 year, your hippocampus was shrinking by 2 to 3% because of isolation and a monotonous lifestyle. And they knew if they do that to other people, the shrinking will occur. Instead of growing, shrinking. And that's dramatic, because everybody gets closer to a depression and Alzheimer's, because
Wow.
we need these new cells. The new cells that are productively produced, that they survive, are essentially the neuronal correlate of what we call psychological resilience. In other words, if you shut down the production of these new cells by all these measures, then the resilience drops, and the opposite happens. You are more prone to depression, because your psychological resilience is essentially down.
It makes it sound so, I mean, it is nefarious, but it makes it sound so much more nefarious than most people want to accept, because, I said before we came on, because you're from Germany, in an area where I did a lot of work on Hannah Arendt all through college, and then I wrote a screenplay about her. And in Origins of Totalitarianism, she even says in that book that the best time for totalitarians to take over society is by using isolation and loneliness. She has a whole section about isolation and loneliness, and how it's a weapon. And she wasn't thinking on your level of the hippocampus and all of this stuff, but she was just saying from her point of view that was being a weapon that was used, and it was certainly used during the entire lockdown situation. It's funny, when it started, I know a lot of people who are sober and got sober through AA and other programs where you have meetings, and your fellowship with other men keep you healthy and sober. And it's that schedule and showing up and feeling like you're part of a group. And when I saw the lockdowns, I was in Manhattan at the time, so the lockdowns were really harsh. And I said, oh, so they're shutting all the schools, they're shutting all the churches, they're shutting anywhere that people meet in for recovery. I was thinking about friends that were sober. And I said, and they're leaving open the liquor stores. I thought, well, great. Well, you got the 25 million people that go to meetings every day to save their lives and stay sober, just lost that. And I thought that it's going to be suicide, overdose, relapse, like you're saying. And it seemed very clear to me that was going to happen. And like you're saying, now let me ask you, when so when that happened with the lockdowns and everything, we had a series of videos that came out from Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and of course Prince Charles, and all kinds of people talking about, again, Build Back Better and all of this. But what I've come to believe about Build Back Better, which kind of goes in line, I think, maybe with your book, is that they have to destroy what is, whatever we think is and is normal and natural, and has been for thousands of years, if not hundreds of years. No longer to these people, especially the great resetters, worked. And that everything had to be redone into this fourth industrial revolution and all of that. So when you're talking about purpose and about interaction and all of that, and then you juxtapose it with what these people were putting out there. I mean, I scoured the World Economic Forum's websites. I connected it to the UN and a bunch of other places, World Health Organization, especially their tactical group that was set up at the World Health Organization with Cass Sunstein and I think Sage in England, on behavioral modification and forcing people to do stuff. A lot of this is about totally removing the human element from everything. And the more you read what they're saying, even through the you will own nothing, universal basic income, what they're doing is taking away purpose of living at all.
Yeah. The problem is, when I compare this to when you install a new operating system in a computer. When you put a new operating system in a computer, you don't want the new one being interfered by the old one. So the first thing what you do is you erase essentially every memory you have and you reformat essentially the computer. And only then you can install the new one and it runs smoothly. So if you want to install essentially a new operating system in society that you don't want to have anybody to interfere with, you have to erase memory. You have to erase the previous thought, pretty much like they have done in Brave New World. But
Right.
there, of course, it's much easier. They didn't have to erase anything. People are already born when they are born. I mean, decanted from the bottles in the book.
Exactly.
Then you essentially install them with the narratives that you want to have, propagated. But here, of course, we have already a society that has their own, where every individual has its own history, his personality, and his own way to reflect on things. And in the sum of all people, essentially, is the immune system of the society, the sum of all individualities. And now, what do you want to do to get into a situation where everybody only has this new operating system in the brain? Well, the target is really the production of these new cells, which are actually called index neurons in the hippocampus. These index neurons are essentially nerve cells that are produced every night and are essentially like the index to all our memories of all our life. So if you shut down index neuron production, and this is done by the measures in 2020, and as I show in my book, by the spike protein, either coming from infection, but mainly, of course, now through these spiking programs, then you shut down index neuron production. The problem the hippocampus has, if new information comes along that is important, how can you store it without new index neurons? Well, the only way to do it is to override the previous ones. And then actually you have what we call the reformatting of the brain. You override the index neurons that maybe memorized what I've experienced as a child when I blew out the birthday candle, or when I experienced all my life, what I've experienced, which makes
Right.
up my personality, are stored in these individual index neurons. And if I shut down index neuron production, which is done perfectly now, either through the measurements, but now, of course, through this recurring spiking, where actually the failure to provide immune protection is an advantage from the point of view of this overriding, idea, because it doesn't work very well. So we have to repeat it every half year or every year at least. But we know that this is essentially the time frame the spike protein persists in the brain. So you have a continuous spike presence by this repeated spiking. And the consequence is all these narratives we hear is all this fear mongering, which
Right.
because the hippocampus learns only if there's a strong emotion involved with what he has to learn. Everyday routine, the hippocampus ignores. The hippocampus only learns when what we experience, what we think, comes with an emotion. Now we have no index neurons available for new thoughts, for new emotional content. But of course, all these narratives, the war on this, the war on that,
Right.
all these dangerous global wars against climate, against whatever, come, of course, with lots of emotions. So they are installed in the hippocampus. But of course, every installation of every thought based on this fear mongering destroys a piece of our personal history in the brain.
I don't know about you, but I feel a lot better being prepared for whatever's coming. Every day I hear something new. Something's coming from the CDC, something's coming from the FDA, who's trying to take over our healthcare system, all this craziness. And what I know is that one man really changed my life, how I look at everything that's happening to me health wise. And that was Dr. Zelenko. He was a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show. And he came up with the most amazing products. Z-Stack has been a game changer for us. We have not been sick since we've been on it. We take it regularly. If we feel like we're coming down with something, we'll double up. But he has all new products over at the website. God rest his soul. He did not leave us unprepared. And that is very important for you to prepare. So he's got Z Shield. He's got a kid's Z Stack, which is awesome. He's got Z Flu, Z Detox. He's got all kinds of things. He always said to me, your immune system must be clean, resilient, and resistant. This matters the most. And what I can say on top of that is that he supported me. He supported free speech. He supported medical freedom. He supported personal liberty, and everything that I believe in, he believed in. He inspired me to be myself, to speak up, to speak out. And what matters is that you are feeling healthy, whole, clean, clear, focused, and that your immune system is protected from anything that comes our way. And Z-Stack is the best way to do that. Please stock up on Z-Stack. Go to themelkshow.com, go to our partners page, goes down to Z-Stack. That also supports this show. When you buy from our partners, these great people, especially Dr. Zelenko, who's dear to me, you are supporting the show and keeping us going. And I know that truth, freedom, and the First Amendment matter to you. They matter to him. They matter to me. So make sure you're always healthy. You're always out there. You're always standing up. Be brave. Courage is contagious. It's so
And
nefarious. I can't even believe this because I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. There was a military document in America. It's on my resource page, written by Michael Aquino and a different valet is the other guy. It's called Mind Wars. It's from the 60s, and it was a army military psychological operation document, Mind Wars, and it was later made declassified, but it was classified at first. And what you're talking about, it's very scary, but there are people that are this smart and this evil. the same time. And I think a lot of people, just like back to Iran again, the banality of evil, and a lot of that is about not thinking. It's this is a level to me, what you're saying, and if I'm putting it together with the work I've done on my end, is the whole point of a lot of this, including what you're talking about with the actual biology and the hippocampus and all of this, had to have been a two-part plan. Because what you're saying to me is the actual spike proteins and the brain barrier and the attack on the hippocampus. On top of that, it coincided with, in America at least, but the world, Black Lives Matter marches. It coincided with obviously the fear and anxiety surrounding the people dropping dead on the streets videos we all were seeing in China that couldn't have been real in retrospect. It coincided here with a lot of well, all over the world with riots in the streets. While they're locking us down in New York, they're having hundreds of thousands of Black Lives Matter marches all over the country. There's looting and rioting at the same time that we're locked down. I mean, and I look at it all. I look all the way back to a year before they dropped the COVID. Well, before we were told about it on the news. To there was so much social unrest, and then and then after the COVID, so we're still in this phase. And then in America and the world, people need to know this is worldwide. Then they started hitting us with diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, hardcore Marxism, which is in all of our schools now, which they've been building in America. People that watch me know, since the 60s, certainly, probably before, but definitely since then. So all of the things you're talking about, biologically and neurology and all this stuff in your brain was then hit. It couldn't have been but what you're saying, it had to have been, in my opinion, because I think we're in a war, a real war. I think we're in World War III when people talk about it. I think we've been since COVID, but what you're talking about, and then throw in the coordinated worldwide Marxism and communism that is still being spewed on everyone. Do you see that relation as being part of the same plan? Is that coordinated?
Well, I cannot say for each individual issue that we have, but in common sense dictates from the point of view of the index neurons. The
Right.
only way you can make sure that you have a complete override of our previous existence in the long term is by changing the problems. You have to change the problems on a daily basis, actually. The hippocampus, as I told you, writes on emotion. That's his exclusion criteria if he wants to remember something or not. Things which don't create a certain emotion, and fear is a very strong one, it wouldn't remember. So it needs emotion, and of course, if something happens a second, a third, or fourth time, then the emotion is not there anymore. If I see something every day, I start to get well, it starts to get boring, and
Yep.
it's boring for the brain and for the hippocampus. So you have to change the issue on a daily basis. Actually, you have to throw in problems from everywhere in the world, and you have to mix them up and change them all the time. And that essentially creates a situation where, under a lack of index neuron production, the hippocampus is forced to remember it day by day, every time new things. And you end up essentially at the end as a person, which is not a person anymore. You are essentially a single-minded creature whose personality only consists of the narratives that we are told in the news on a daily basis.
Wow.
And of course, such a narrative is fear. Fear, 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 and all the issues that you have experienced are global issues. I mean, global warming, global wars that could end up in an atomic third world
Right.
war.
Yep.
We have the pandemics that the World Economic Forum is predicting. And so we have all these global issues. Of course, that means that if you are a person without individuality anymore, but only with a personality that consists of fear, and
Right.
you know that, and you can't bear it anymore. It's too much for you after a while. I mean, it's too much
Yeah.
already, but it becomes more and more unbearable. And then, of course, what do you want? You know that your government cannot solve a global problem, so you scream for a global rescue, somebody who rescue globally. And of course, the people who have instilled all these wars worldwide, wars against climate, wars against viruses, wars over certain borders, which are in the greater sense
Created.
idiotic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then of course you have these guys who have essentially created all
Right.
these wars come now to the rescue and tell us, okay, the World Health Organization now is the key to solve all these global
Right.
problems. And we have
It's so
already in
crazy.
Germany, we already have, and I think it's worldwide now. We have installed laws that if the next virus comes, the World Health Forum, the World Health
Yeah. And they're
Organization will
trying
take
here.
over
Yeah.
our system.
Yeah, they're trying here too, and you know, and I've really on my work, I've really mapped all of it because it's not just the World Health Organization. It is a global,
No.
I call it the octopus of global control. They have tentacles everywhere, so they're all connected. The UN, World Health Organization, World Economic
Mhm.
Forum,
Yeah.
IPCC, a bunch of NGOs, and then above that are the financial institutions. And the reason that I always say this to people is I just say, go look at Agenda 2030, look at their 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Absolutely.
Think about, go to all of these websites of the groups I'm saying are connected. They all have the same global governance. It's all about we have to give up our national sovereignty, our borders, language, culture, everything because global governance and it's got to be a one world ID, a one world money, a one world this. It's just top down totalitarian technocratic control by this globalist oligarch of elitists that think that I call them the Fourth Reich, and people say don't like that. But I say if you look at the Third Reich's actual plans and you look at what these guys are doing and saying, they're very similar, especially and Klaus Schwab and these guys don't hide it. It's not like they're hiding
No.
their plans. I did want to jump to something though because it's very interesting to me. Is this why they target children because their index and their memory is so young?
Absolutely. That's the only logical explanation for me why pregnant women and children, yeah, essentially are injected with this stuff, not because they are in any risk of a severe disease. It's really there must be another reason, and the only reason I can show is that it goes into the brain, it shuts down the hippocampus. And if you go back to Brave New World, funnily,
No, I know.
uh, the children essentially grow. I mean, they are born out of bottles, and while they develop in the bottles, you create different levels of brain abilities, alphas, betas, gammas, and so forth. And the way they do it is they reduce the oxygen. And it's actually interesting that if you reduce oxygen in the brain, the region that is most harmed is actually the hippocampus.
Wow.
So even though at the time Aldous Huxley wrote the book, he didn't know about the hippocampus. This was discovered in the 50s. He already had a good anticipation how to harm the autobiographical memory
Yeah.
to make it easier to store information the way the narratives wants to be stored.
Yeah, I've looked into him and his family. I've done a show on him. He was not warning us. He was actually drawing a pretty good picture of what they could actually do, in my opinion, looking into his background and his family and stuff. Unlike 1984, where I think that book is more like, hey, this can happen. Where you know, the Huxley book is more like, well, maybe this will be possible because those were a lot of technocrats and those were a lot of people that believed in control through science. And, you know, that's where
But
we are
that's
now. Now the teenager aspect too, because these people don't teenagers don't have this long-term index of what you're talking about. So we've all watched here, but I know it's also in Germany. Our K through 12 kids have been, and it's been longer than we realize. A lot of parents in America did not wake up to what their children were being taught in these public schools that have really largely been systematically turned into socialism factories. Once you start to connect it, and then you look at the Columbia University and some of the other ones that have changed the curriculum for students in America fundamentally from the beginning. A lot of parents didn't realize the communism and socialism and on feelings and thoughts and all of that. Instead of learning the fundamentals we were taught in school, math and science and English and language and writing, they're not learning that anymore. They're now teaching kids that biology is a choice, basically nothing is real. How you feel matters most. Math doesn't matter, grades don't matter. Is that the next level of manipulating the mind? Because what's scary is, let's talk about, like, 13 to 17 years old, with what you're talking about with the brain, and they've all been injected and they were all locked down and they were with the masks. And, if they didn't have parents that were really awake in a big way before. So now these are now they're college kids. They're marching around the world over things like be it climate change or a ceasefire, whatever, in masses, hundreds of thousands of them. And we know you're in Germany, but also in Mao's China, that the teenage element was very important to the infiltration and kind of coercion of society towards totalitarianism. So where is the teenage brain in this pathway? And then what is that? Because that's very dangerous to me. I feel like this age group, 13 to probably 25, right now in America are fully indoctrinated. It seems
Yeah.
very dangerous.
That's the same we have here in Germany. It's essentially also a global war against everybody. I mean, it's not just
Right,
a country like the United
right.
States or any other that is here the issue. It's every country. That's also the huge problem if you compare it to the Third Reich, which you did.
Yeah.
This is completely different because, of course, former totalitarian systems were still kind of
But
nations. There were nations around it which served as an alternative, as an alternative way of living, and they show people, look, that's how we live and that's how they live, and there's a difference. And people were struggling with that. But the future will be one world and one technocratic governance that which will tell via artificial intelligence how we have to live. And even German documents by the government show that in 2030,
Yep.
this is essentially the key year, apparently.
Yep.
Artificial intelligence will essentially create a society in Germany that is a post-voting society.
Right.
Democracy is gone. I mean, it's already gone in a way today,
Yep.
because, but
Yep.
of course, this will complete a complete new generation of people will live that has. And we don't know what the technocrats have, what the idea is, what they want to do with the people. Of course, one of the leaders, Harari, for example, a spokesperson from the World Economy Forum, says that what do we do with all these useless people? The rise of the useless class. 90% of the people will be superfluous. And of course, what you talked about, what we learn in school, the same here in Germany. Well, everything like math and all these things that we learned in school are not necessary to know anymore, because artificial intelligence will be better anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So we are left just feeling okay with what the artificial intelligence tells us to do, if it tells us at all anything to do. My fear is we are just leftovers. Essentially, a few will be left over at the end that live in a zoo and
Yeah.
are ruled by artificial intelligence, and because humans are not necessary anymore in the future.
And that's what they say. And what's very scary, and people have to understand this, they don't hide it. Because when you watch Harari and some of these people speak, which I've unfortunately done for my own work, and a whole room of people. Here's the other thing that I want to ask you about. So there's, we call it, if you look at the Council of Foreign Relations put out stuff, or this book Tragedy and Hope that kind of, I think, breaks down, or Rockefeller's writings, they believe that they're a super class. That's why I call them the Fourth Reich, because and they don't have any alliance to any country, which you're right, makes it very different. It seems like it's this globalist billionaire oligarchy, and they're from all countries, and they don't have allegiance to any nation or any people or anything. They have this technocratic, totalitarian, top down, and they meet in Davos and all over the world. They don't hide. They have the COP conference right now, and they're planning for this future. And I always say, because Harari says in one video, and people stand up and clap. So those people that are standing up and clapping when Harari says things like, "We don't know what we're going to do with the useless people, I guess video games and drugs," and the whole room
Mhm.
claps. It's really, really terrifying. But these people I identify as the problem, and they really do believe that. But Harari also says, well, the elite will have. They have plans. Like he says, like the elite have a plan. They're going to, like Noah's Ark, he's saying, like they have a plan. So this is a worldwide manipulation by a group of people that are aligned with this fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Body, Internet of Things. Joe Biden in our country passed all these, who's a globalist, passed all these executive orders about biochemistry, about track and trace surveillance, about neurology. So they need all that stuff. That 17 development goals is really about, in my opinion, track and trace surveillance, full top-down control, universal basic income, all ID. So they're basically telling you that. And I always say to people that say, "Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. It can't be a worldwide thing." I say, well, look at the development goals and tell me who's enforcing them. Because if you take a step back and say, well, okay, these are goals for the whole world that Obama signed on to in 2015, and everything since then has been going towards these 17 goals, just like in your country. And the next question is, who's enforcing them? So when you look at this, I believe that God, first of all, I believe in God, and I believe that these people believe that they are God, and that they are deciding for humanity, our future. And because of what you're talking about, so many people are indoctrinated and being reprogrammed that they don't realize that these people are walking us into this place. But who are these people to you? Because there's something, because they're aligned globally. They've pulled off the pandemic that the whole world walked in lockstep with. I think enough people are awake now. I think your book is probably, of all the books I've heard about so far that have come out, the most important, because it's putting together both. But what do these people want? What is do you look at them, the people putting this out, the transhumanists and the Internet of Body, Internet of Things, and like Klaus Schwab says, and he's just a spokesperson. There's people way above him, in my opinion, but he says things like, and we don't want to change who you are. We want to change what you are, like you're saying. What is their goal here?
That's a good question. I can't really answer it, to be honest, because I'm not in their minds. I
Right.
can't understand. I, as a human being that wants people to evolve, to the best, and that everybody has. That's why I was fighting Alzheimer's for 10 years, not
Right.
only because for the Alzheimer's patients, but Alzheimer's is a 20, 30, 40-year long process where the mind is suffering and people don't live as happy as they could if the neurogenesis in the brain would work. So I was fighting essentially against the loss of, or the blockade of neurogenesis by a lifestyle that is unhealthy. So I'm totally different than these technocrats, and it's
Right.
really, really almost impossible for me to even think what they are thinking, because how does a sociopath think?
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. I don't know.
Exactly.
It's impossible for me to imagine what's going on in their brain. but I know that they go over corpses, and quite easily. I
Yeah.
mean, they want to save humanity by killing humanity. That's essentially what I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I don't know how
Very
how,
bizarre. I
yeah.
think there's enough people that get this, but we really do. We are behind. Now, let me ask you. So I was pointing a lot at this Human Genome Project, and a lot of the stuff that was I got kicked off of YouTube, as I told you, for having done too many doctors early in COVID when Zelenko and other people were saying like there was treatment, including vitamin D. But I've been looking at some of this stuff, and a lot of the stuff that was going on at MIT and Harvard and some of that in Stanford and some of these other places. I'm sure in your country at your best universities as well, and I'm certainly probably at the Imperial College and other places in the UK. And it appears that this brain science stuff, and I know a lot of people thought about it. Obama started a big brain initiative. I think it was like he put in like $700 million, and people are like, "What is he doing? Like, what is?" And people were thinking, "Oh, they're going to end depression. They're going to end this. They're going to end that." And at the same time, that same time period, they were also starting a lot of new bioweapons labs at the same time. And if you really look at a lot of this stuff, it is about changing the genome. I mean, there's a lot. There's even that CRISPR technology is very scary and dangerous. So they want to, they have extraordinary wealth. Obviously, we know that's a whole nother story. But they have been working with these elite universities. You did academic research in University of California, a big one in UCLA as well. Um, they've been doing this research for about 30 years on the brain. And then you look at it, and a lot of this stuff aligns with, like you brought up, big pharma and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Health Organization. So they know that the brain is key to this. So when they talk about like transhumanism and all of that, what is our defense to this path that they've obviously been on and done all this research on? And it's funny, China doesn't hide this stuff because China has no problem with putting it out there. So China talks about babies in, just like you said of Huxley, that they can make babies in artificial wombs, and they talk about super soldiers and all of this. So this is a war on the brain. And how advanced are they, and how much can we do?
Well, this is a good question. I mean, the last chapter in my book, I propose what the alternative is. And the alternative, first of all, is that we have to understand where they're attacking us. I mean, what is the region, the brain, does it attack? And at the same time, while this region is extremely vulnerable, because there are cells growing, and of course, nothing is as vulnerable to insult as something that grows. I mean, something that is static is less likely harmed than something that needs to grow. And these cells need to grow, and they have to fine tune. And that's why they are so vulnerable. And of course, uh, that's bad. But on the other side, it's also good because we know we can regenerate the brain. We can even regenerate after in the early phases of Alzheimer's, which is a disease caused by a lack of neurogenesis in the hippocampus.
Right.
So what I showed, and others have proven now in clinical trials that are based on a natural lifestyle, that by turning back and say, well, this is all unhealthy for my brain. Now I change and do something healthy for my brain. And my book shows what you have to do with this formula against indoctrination.
Yep.
Then, of course, you can better think. You are stronger. You have a stronger self. That you are more curious. You have maybe better thoughts because you are better equipped to think, yeah,
Yep.
laterally,
Yeah.
and think about things how they might be different. And of course, you are more able to convince others, like I try
Yeah.
with my book and so forth, that this is not good what's going on.
Yeah.
So we have to create a majority of people who worldwide who understand what's going on. So we need a strong diagnosis,
Right.
and I think my book provides a
It does.
diagnosis.
It does. Now, I want to
And
ask you
so if you,
something about that,
hmm?
because here's something that I think is happening too. I spent 22 years in Hollywood, and I'm a writer. It's funny you talk about this stuff with the brain and memory and indexing. And I studied from like 17 years old sense memory, which is it's somewhat of a dangerous form of acting training. And I studied it for years, so I totally understand bringing up memory. I mean, it's dangerous if you're not sane to begin with. I've known a lot of actors who went crazy studying that, but it's what you're saying, and it was really resonating with me. But something I've noticed too, and you're bringing up AI, and very important, is the arts. They've totally bastardized and AI'd, and in my world, when I was a young filmmaker, it was sky was the limit. You write a movie, you get a cast, you put it up, or you put up theater, or you're a musician and you go play at clubs. You build your way up to making money off of a living that you started out of love and passion and creativity. And I think there's been a real war on creativity too, a real war
Hmm?
on beauty, on art, on architecture, I mean, on you can't even sell a movie now if it's not completely totally woke and indoctrination and all of that. Music now, you can't really find of this generation musicians that it's not all computerized and amped up. It's like the old instruments. They also took out, at least here, art and music and all of that out of the schools probably 15 years ago. So there's been also a real war on art and creativity and imagination and ingenuity and all these things that you're talking about that make life purpose and worthwhile, that all the way
Exactly.
back to time, Shakespeare, even all the way back to the beginning, of Egyptian like drawings on the walls and stuff. They want us to have none of that. That's the
Yeah.
stuff that to me brings so much joy, is art and music and theater, and that's something that's already been, I think, fully attacked. And now they're telling us that we don't even need to do any of that because AI is going to do it. And there was a big, I'm in unions that just got off strike in Hollywood. Writers and actors were on strike for months and months, of course, during this whole thing. And during the whole thing, the thing was, well, AI is going to write all the movies. AI is going to write all the music. They were selling NFTs, fake AI art for millions of dollars. Is the war on art and creativity that has to be included in what you're talking about? I'm guessing,
Absolutely. I mean, individuality is a source of creativity.
right?
And if you diminish or destroy individuality, then creativity is diminished as well. And I've given a talk about this actually at the University of Munich, and the professor who invited me was an American professor at the German at the Munich. She's a professor of art in Munich, and I talked about this. And I also talked about how the mental energy we need to be creative is actually stored in the index neurons.
Well,
And she is also an editor of the scientific journal Frontiers in Psychology. And now, and actually over Christmas, I have to write a paper about this discovery I've made. That actually the mental energy we need to be creative, to be able to think, is actually stored in the new neurons that are produced every night. And if you target these neurons, which is also explained, of course, in the indoctrinated brain in full detail, if you target these cells, you destroy creativity while you destroy individuality and personality.
wow, that is amazing because we all see it happening, and um, it's very sad. I see, but here's what I think too. With everything you're saying, I think that I think we are getting to a place where there is going to be a backlash, and what I'm kind of hoping is that people go back the other direction, go back to, because they're taking away farming, which is another thing that's people love to garden, love to farm. They're taking away the creativity, even for people like us. I'm writing a book too, you write a book. You have to go to specific places for them to even put out this work, if you want to make music or movies or theater or whatever right now. But I feel like there's a backlash coming in all this stuff, and that is what you're saying in your book makes it so much more important. I really think your book, for all the books I've seen so far, is the most important in terms of understanding where we are and what the danger is and how we personally can change that. Because for me, everything that you're talking about in the book, we as individuals, given gifts by God and our regular body, immune system, brain, can reverse this individually. I'm writing something about that it's the individual citizen has to take responsibility for what's happening in their
Absolutely.
country. So what are your thoughts on how we can in our lives reverse this, and then thus once we do, be a leader and somebody who can encourage other people? I think it's going back to the basics probably.
Absolutely. I mean, humans have grown up in small communities. I mean, essentially, we can only live with 50, 60, 70 people. Beyond that, our mind essentially is overwhelmed. So we need small communities again, which are self-sufficient, which share the same values and work closely together. At the same time, and that's the ability of the index neuron production and our autobiographical memory, is that while we are very empathic with people around us, we have what I call rational empathy or rational compassion. That means we can rationalize that whatever we do locally has an impact on people somewhere else in the world. And
Right.
so we have to have both. We have this ability to be empathic locally and work together closely with people, which give us fulfillment. At the same time, whatever we do, we can think based on our ability that our mental system allows us to have, that we can extrapolate what's going on in the world with the actions we take. And give you an example, which was really astonishing to me. I went to my doctor in 2021 for a checkup, and she asked me, "Hey, you didn't get the injection yet. It's time for you. You have to be empathic, about all these people you save the lives if you get injected." And I told her, "Well, I have spent a fair amount of time with researching everything, and it doesn't work. This stuff doesn't work. And of course, there are other ways we can save people by just giving them enough vitamin D. Of course, it's a seasonal disease like influenza, and of course, we all know for 40 years now that
Right.
vitamin D would do the trick. But But I said, I see a much worse problem with the lockdowns we had last year. That was 2020. We had shut down the support of people in third countries in the what we call the global south, and millions of people suffered from hunger more than before. So where is your empathy? And the only thing she said to me is, well, I'm happy that I live in a country where we don't suffer from hunger.
Oh,
So while at one point she was only empathic about all these people suffering,
right,
like you saw in the newspapers and in television, which wouldn't be suffering, by the way, if, and I show this in my book, how with the proof that this is all essentially a created problem that was not real and it could have been solved easily. But on the other side, she was not empathic about people outside our essentially
right,
local world. And
right,
so what I realized here is that she already lacked the index neuron production. There was no index neuron production. She was not able, yeah, she was physically not able to comprehend what her local actions, the local actions our government has taken, governments all over the world have taken, did to other parts of the world where people were reliant on getting food from us.
right.
So I thought it was amazing, but essentially we can revert this. The hippocampus can grow, and so he's on the one hand he's a target of all these wars. So all these wars we see, wars against climate change, against diseases, is essentially a war against the hippocampus.
Right.
But this war can be won because the hippocampus is resilient in a way that it can recover. And it was shown even people with 70 years old of age, usually they have a shrinkage rate of the hippocampus by 1 to 2%.
Right.
If they just start walking, eating better, yeah.
Your skin isn't the same as everyone else's. That's why Agency designed Future Formula, a personalized anti-aging formula.
Eating better, yeah, communicating with people, have a sense of purpose in life, the hippocampus starts to grow again. And that gives me a good hope that we can regrow our ability to be humans again.
Yeah. I think your book is so important and it makes so much sense. People have to understand the big picture of it and that they do have the ability for their brain. People talked a lot about neuroplasticity and how there's so many things you can do and they're doing all this research. It seems like they did a lot of nefarious research on how to manipulate the brain, but your work is really saying here's positive stuff you can do because that's the beauty of the brain. I always say God gave us the best computer there is, and that is our human brain and our human body. And it's like the way that you're putting it right now, we need to take control of that ourselves. And there's so much we can do because God gave each of us this spark and ability to do what we need to do for ourselves. And I think your book is a good guide to really explain how people can take back their brain. Because, like I said in the beginning, there's a DARPA document that went out. It was in conjunction with NATO and their innovation hub worldwide called the war for your brain or the cognitive warfare, but that was like the subtitle, and it talks all about the military affecting the individual brain of individuals or groups. And it's like, well, what you're saying and what you prove in your book is, yeah, but we can do that ourselves. We can counter that, and I think that's really, really the most important thing people need to understand. Now, should everyone? It's funny because I remember them talking about vitamin D, lack of vitamin D, probably 10 years ago. I started hearing a lot about it. And it's something that people didn't really think about, but now they do. Are you, but then I saw during the beginning of COVID, we know somebody who got sued by the FDA for recommending vitamin D. So they must have known that that was an issue. I think he spent like $700,000 fighting the FDA that was trying to take his medical license over him recommending that. So you recommend vitamin D too in general for people too as well, just in terms of the medical side of helping your brain.
Well, it has been published. Yeah, the vitamin D is not only for the immune system, our, let's say, defense system against microorganisms. It's also important for our mental immune system.
Right.
Just to give you an idea, 20 nanomole per liter is usually what we measure in older people when they are in retirement homes and so forth. Sometimes even below that. The ideal level is 125 nanomole per liter, and that's 100 nanomole more. Well, for every 10 nanomole increase, you reduce your Alzheimer's rate by 7%.
Wow.
For
That's
example,
great.
yeah, because
Yeah.
the hippocampal neurogenesis can only take place if every micronutrient, which is essential, is actually there. And 125 nanomole essentially is the natural level which you measure, for example, in hunter and gatherer societies, which never see a doctor but live outside in Africa.
Right.
And they have a level of 125 nanomole. And it was published in a great meta study where they put together many, many studies on vitamin D. And they extrapolated that with 125 nanomole, the likelihood of dying on COVID is essentially zero.
Wow.
That was
That's
published peer
incredible.
reviewed. So it's all peer reviewed in all the papers you find in my book. And you will see that that with this knowledge, and this knowledge was there already in the beginning, it is clear that that this is a war not against the virus, it's a war against the brain.
Oh, wow, this is incredible. The Indoctrinated Brain is your book. Can you tell everyone where to find it? I highly recommend it. Not only get this book because understand what happened here, but we all have to understand that we are responsible for our own brains, and we can still control them, because the war on the brain, when military grade people that are involved in this, whatever this war is, are writing their own documents on how to manipulate brains of not just individuals, but groups and societies and masses, and we're watching it worldwide. Dr. Nels has put out a book that kind of gives you back control and ways to counter that. And we really do need to counter the war on our brains, I believe, right now, more than almost anything else. And once you do, then you can help other people. So can you tell people where to follow you and how to find you? I'll put all the links below. And I think this is the most important book that's come out so far. A lot of books have come out, and they're coming more and more and more and more people are doing that. But I don't think people really put together the mind war aspect. I think
Yeah.
we are in a World War III scenario, and that it's a psychological war and information war. So please tell my audience how to find and buy your book.
Well, the book is being published by Skyhorse, in the US. So like a book from, like, for example, the real Anthony Fauci by Kennedy.
Okay, yeah,
So it's a good company, and of course you will see get all my links to the book, but it's already being available at all at the internet and everywhere, and
yeah,
hopefully worldwide, because it's a worldwide war, and that's why I decided in the last summer to translate the book myself
yeah.
and to get it out, and I hope that the whole world will see
Me
the
too.
diagnosis so that the whole world can start a therapy that is worthwhile.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Nels. This book is incredible. It is so important. And it's important right now because a lot of people are waking up. We're seeing people all over the world really getting this global situation. And the more, the better. So I'm really grateful you're in Germany. Before we leave, do you feel like people in Germany, it's hard to tell because we don't get any real news anymore, obviously part of the same brain conditioning situation. Do you feel that there are people in Germany that are starting to push back and starting to really get this? Is there a wave starting there?
Absolutely.
Oh, great.
Absolutely. We have new parties forming at the moment,
Great.
and I was already invited several times to take part in these new parties that
Great.
it is strong. In the Netherlands, one party won at the
Yeah, I
moment,
know.
which is completely against it.
Yeah.
And the same might actually be happening here in Germany. So I really believe that we have a chance to recover and fight back. And the war takes place in the brain, and that's where we have to put our weapons together. Exactly, the brain is our weapon against the war against our brain. So, and
Exactly.
that's going on. And in Germany, I think we have a chance. And now with this book, I hope that other countries will realize, leaders in other countries will realize what's really going on, and use this book as a weapon to fight against it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. And it is a weapon. And please, everyone, go get the book for yourself. Get it for somebody else too. And also go to we are partnered with a wellness company. Go get yourself some vitamin D and read his